Hey y'all! So today we're going to be jumping back into chapter 14 in the book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. And we're going to be talking about the first section where the author breaks down explaining the story, The Handless Maiden. I've already forgot the name of it. I was just reading about it too. So this first section where she's breaking down the symbolism of the story is called The First Stage, The Bargain Without Knowing. And so I'm going to be reading a lot of it to you and summarizing less of it because it's just so wonderful. And it's funny because it's kind of like the theme of losing or detaching from our intuition is kind of the baseline throughout this whole book, right? But I find value in breaking down all of these stories and concepts the way that the author does, because it's like, it seems like it should be a simple thing to me. You know what I mean? Like, oh, okay, I just didn't listen to my gut. Period. But when you start looking at, the reasons why this happens within our mind and understanding the missing pieces that we didn't have when we didn't listen to our intuition, it's kind of like you understand that there has to be like a marriage of both your intuition and awareness as well. And the awareness is only going to be there when you have knowing, when you have gained wisdom, so the lessons and the wisdom, I feel like, work together to bring us to this point that she actually calls an initiation, which I love, because we don't really, in modern culture and society anyway, especially in America, I don't feel like you ever hear about families talking about a rite of passage, which is commonplace throughout history. With different tribes and cultures, they would honor these different stages of a person's development, especially a young person's development. They would honor that through ceremonies and things like that. So I feel like those kinds of things really did serve a purpose, and I feel like those are the kind of things that are missing in our modern culture. Just personally, I feel like that would bring more awareness and attention to the stages of development. And instead, I feel like, modern young people are just thrown out there without understanding how we do go through different stages of development, within our mind, and how everything works together, like I was talking about, your intuition, your awareness, wisdom, and lessons. So I love how we at least have the opportunity to pause in our life and, take hold of our life and do our own research and come to a good place within our own mind of understanding, so that we can make better choices, better decisions, right? And so that's the path we're walking together, and I just so enjoy it. Not that it's been easy, certainly, but when you can find and align with your own kind, it makes it much more enjoyable and actually a beautiful experience. So I hope that you're having a good time as well, and let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so this first stage, she calls it the first stage, the bargain without knowing, is essentially about how we fall into the hands of predators, right? Because we don't know, which is why she calls it without knowing, right? So that awareness is not there. It's not sharpened. It's not acute at this point. We're naive in this stage, in this first stage. And so we're going to be exploring what happens in our mind when this happens through the characters. So she starts out talking about the miller in the story, who was the father, and how he made a poor bargain with the devil, and it was all about, he was thinking it was a good deal. He was going to enrich himself and his family, and he didn't realize, remember, that he was actually trading his daughter for the riches, and he thought it was the apple tree. And so that was the part where he didn't know what he was doing. There was a piece missing. He didn't know the daughter was back there beside the apple tree. So she says, so regarding this tale, as women, we must ask ourselves here at the beginning, what poor bargain does every woman make? And I would say man as well. I think this is relevant for all of us. Though we might respond with different answers on different days, there is one answer that is constant to all women's lives. Though we hate to admit it, over and over again, the poorest bargain of our lives is the one we make when we forfeit our deep knowing life for one that is far more frail. When we give up our teeth, our claws, our sense, our scent. So she's always making references to wildlife and wolves, you know. When we surrender our wilder natures for a promise of something that seems rich but turns out to be hollow. And of course there are some people who knowingly marry for wealth and for riches. You know, it's like they go into it knowing that it's going to be a shallow and hollow arrangement. And I can't wrap my mind around that, but that's not what we're talking about here. This is when we make poor decisions, but we don't realize that it's going to turn out to be hollow. You see what I'm saying? So it's different than someone who's going into something knowingly. So she says, like the father in the tale, we make this bargain without realizing the sorrow, the pain, and the dislocation it will cause us. We can be smart in the ways of the world, and yet almost every mother's daughter, if given half a chance, chooses the poor bargain at first. The making of this awful bargain is a matter of enormous and meaningful paradox. There we get into that term paradox again, right? Which I feel like is more closely aligned to ultimate truth than black and white thinking, either or type thinking. So just keep that in mind. She says, even though choosing poorly could be seen as a pathologically self-destructive response, it is far more often turns into a watershed event that brings vast opportunity, yes, to redevelop the power of the instinctive nature. So in a sense, this is where that paradox comes in. We are talking about reclamation. We're talking about reclaiming this part of ourselves that we abandoned when we made a poor decision, because a lot of us can look back in hindsight and see the red flags that we ignored on some level. You know, maybe it was a subconscious level, that caught those red flags, but we weren't allowing ourselves to consciously acknowledge them. It's so amazing to me how the mind works in layers like that, layers of consciousness. But so she's talking about redevelop the power of the instinctive nature. So we're reclaiming the instinctive nature, but we're also redeveloping it and making it more and making it sharper and able to catch more and therefore function better. So it's not like going back to the way you were. It's like going back and picking that part of yourself up again, your instinct that you just dropped back there, but you're also going to be adding wisdom to it. So it's going to be better. She says, in this respect, though there is loss and sadness, the poor bargain, like birth and death, constitutes a rather utilitarian step off the cliff, planned by the self in order to bring a woman deep into her wildness. That's heavy. That's really heavy. I feel like what she's saying here is sometimes events in our life may be intentionally experienced by our subconscious or even unconscious. I don't know. Again, I'm not a psychologist or therapist to be able to use those terms exactly right, but hopefully you get the gist of what I'm saying. But it almost sounds like she's saying there's some not fully conscious part of us that chooses bad decisions for the purpose of developing deeper knowing and wisdom. That's kind of how that comes across to me. So I just find that super interesting, if true. She says a woman's initiation begins with the poor bargain she made long ago while still slumbering. By choosing whatever appealed to her as riches, she surrendered in return dominion over some and often every part of her passionate, creative, and instinctive life. That female psychic slumber, get this right here, is a state of approximating somnambulism. During it, we walk, we talk, yet we are asleep. We love, we work, but our choices tell the truth about our condition, right? The voluptuous, the inquiring, the good, and incendiary sides of our natures are not fully sentient. So there's just parts of us in our mind that still need to wake up and be activated so that they can all work together and we can walk through this world wiser. She says, this is the state of the daughter in the tale. She is a lovely creature to behold and innocent. Yet she could forever sweep the yard behind the mill, back and forth and never develop knowing. Yes, it's like being stuck in a loop. So it's almost like these bad experiences can break up that loop, you know, and catapult us into something better. Her metamorphosis has no metabolism. Yeah, so she's kind of stuck. So the tale begins with the unintended but acute betrayal of the young feminine, of the innocent. It can be said that the father, who symbolizes the function of the psyche that is supposed to guide us in the outer world, is in fact very ignorant about how the outer world and the inner world work in tandem, right? When the fathering function of the psyche fails to have knowing about issues of the soul, we are easily betrayed. So she's saying this is one of the most basic things, and she says the father does not realize that many things that present themselves to us are not as they seem upon first contact. Yes, just like a narcissist who's wearing a mask. And so we're just so trusting at first. When we talk about being naive, it usually means we're just super trusting. We assume everybody's the same on the inside. We know that everybody has good intentions. We want to believe that about the world, but it's just not the way it is. And so we have to come to terms with that, to grips with that. And I feel like sometimes, even on a not fully conscious level, we can fool ourselves into believing those, good things that are not true, because our heart just can't accept the depths of darkness in this world. And so it's almost like a protective thing when you talk about equating innocence to being naive. I feel like it's sort of a protective thing that maybe doesn't get fully revealed and digested until we're ready and strong enough to do so. That's kind of some of the thought processes I've had during my own walk. So she says, the initiation into this kind of knowing is the initiation that none of us wants, even though it is the one all of us sooner or later receive. And she talks about different tales, Beauty and the Beast and Bluebeard. There's one called Reynard the Fox. Begin with the father endangering the daughter. Remember, it's all symbolic. But in a woman's psyche, even though the father bumbles into a lethal deal because he knows nothing of the dark side of the world or the unconscious, the horrible moment marks a dramatic beginning for her, a forthcoming consciousness and shrewdness. Yes. No sentient being in this world is allowed to remain innocent forever. In order for us to thrive, our own instinctive nature drives us to face the fact that things are not as they first seem. The wild creative function pushes us to learn about the many states of being, perception, and knowing. These are the many conduits through which the wild woman speaks to us. So this loss and betrayal are the first slippery steps of a long initiatory process that pitches us into La Selva Subterranea, the underground forest. There, sometimes for the first time in our lives, we have a chance to cease walking into walls of our own making and learn to pass through them instead. Yes. And so she's going to start talking about how women's loss of innocence is often ignored, even though in the underground forest, going through all this and gaining wisdom is celebrated. It's considered a rite of passage. And so that's why I feel like when she's talking about, these deep matters that really seem and feel spiritual, if you are a spiritual person, and I feel like, these past cultures, and maybe even some today in other parts of the world, are still openly discussing these things and making them a part of their community. And because of that, it keeps all this stuff in the forefront of people's conscious awareness. And that can only benefit the youth in those tribes and those communities, is how I feel about it. So she says that she has endured and continues to learn gives her both status and honor. Yes, in the underground forest, right? So then she talks about the psyche as a grinder of ideas. I like that. you know. And she says it takes concepts and breaks them down into usable nourishment, so it is a process. So when we talk about processing, that's what's happening, literally puzzle pieces coming together in our mind. Our psyche's hard at work with everything we've experienced, all the lessons, and then everything we've taken in as well, the wisdom piece of it. So she says, in the story, the mill is not milling, if you remember. The psyche's miller is unemployed. This means nothing is being done with all the raw material that comes into our lives on a daily basis. So interesting. So there's no processing happening. The pieces are being accumulated, but the puzzle's not being put together, you could say. It says, and that no sense is being made of all the grains of knowing that blow into our faces from the world and from the underworld. If the miller has no work, the psyche has stopped nourishing itself in critically important ways. So she says the milling of grain has to do with the creative urge. And she says for whatever reason, the creative life of a woman's psyche is at a standstill. A woman who feels thusly senses that she is no longer fragrant with ideas and that she is not fired with invention. She is not grinding finely to find the pith of things. Her mill is silenced. So I love this because it brings me back to the concept of numinosity, because that's what the great creator, our Heavenly Father, is all about, is creation. And I feel like those of us who engage in creative things, in some type of art, you know, music, poetry, writing, whatever it is, it can make you feel like you are at such peace, because it's almost like you're reconnecting on that level with the divine through the creative process. And I feel like that numinous part of us, that's a quality of that, is the creative process. And when that part has been silenced, because remember, the darkness that operates in others, in, like, say, liars and manipulative people who want to harm and exploit us for their own gain, it is you can view it through the lens. Again, apply your own lens, feel free. We're just talking to get the wheels turning. It's almost like it is that battle between darkness and light. And so if the darkness can stop that creative process, it's stopped one of the main qualities of the numinous part of you. You see what I'm saying? And so the effect, what she's saying, is that you're experiencing things, but you're not making sense of it anymore, because that requires that creative part of your mind to still be functioning properly. And if that part has been broken through psychological abuse, then you're not able to put those puzzle pieces together. And I hope that helps you to stop self-convicting for seeing the red flags, but just not doing anything with it. That's the explanation that she's giving. And I just so admire this woman, the author of this book. She spent her entire life, you know, putting all this together for us. So I just feel like that's super valuable information. So then she goes into specifics about, like, what it looks like in our lives when we aren't putting the pieces together, when we're still operating in slumber, as she says. She notices that around age 11 or so, she has determined, this is the author, she feels like around that age is when people seem to fall into a sleep. It's like little children, even though they don't know a lot in the world, they're very sharp, they're very aware, they're very engaged in the present moment, you know, for the most part. Unless something traumatic has hindered that process. It's just natural. And so, and you know, part of that I feel like is because they don't have a past to look back on and dwell on and to distract them. And they don't know enough about life to be able to look toward the future. So really all they have is the present moment. And so, but she's talking about the slumber that comes over us at around age 11 or so. And that's probably, this is just me thinking, when you start to have a past to look back on and you start to be able to look into the future. So you're distracted from the present moment too. And we become a little bit more spacey at that moment. And so she says, whether they are being too cool or too well behaved, in neither state are they responsive to what goes on deep inside, and a sleep gradually covers over the bright-eyed and responsive nature. So peer pressure, wanting to fit in, children's perceptions of societal norms and wanting to, that's just part of like an innate survival function, I feel like, inside of our minds, that we want to assimilate and be like our tribe, be like our family for survival. I think it just goes back to something that basic. And then this is interesting. She starts talking about twisting ourselves around to believe that if we stay asleep, something good will happen for us. And so it's just getting everything twisted, you know. She says, when a woman surrenders her instincts that tell her the right time to say yes and when to say no, when she gives up her insight, intuition, and other wildish traits, then she finds herself in situations that promised gold but ultimately give grief. Yeah. She talks about relinquishing the creative part of yourself for something that's hollow and shallow, and she goes into examples of that, even calling some of this stuff a more sanitary life. Again, sometimes it's more like just doing what you think you should do, as opposed to gauging that by your environment. And you don't want to be a product of your environment. You want to be a product of that inner guiding light telling you what's right for you. You know, that's what we want. And so she goes, in these ways and others, we lose our instincts. So it's when a person's valuing a lifestyle over living aligned with their values and their inner truth and knowing, essentially. She says, now this next part you can really view through the lens of narcissistic behavior. Okay, so listen up. She says, the devil symbolizes the dark force of the psyche she's talking about in the story. The predator, who in this tale is not recognized for what he is. This devil is an archetypal bandit who needs, wants, sucks light. Theoretically, if he were given light, that is, a life with a possibility of love and creativity, then the devil would no longer be the devil. In this tale, the devil is present because the young girl's sweet light has attracted him. Her light is not just any light, but the light from a maiden soul trapped in a somnambulistic state. I feel like that's like partially asleep, sleepwalking. Oh, what a tasty morsel. Her light glows with heartbreaking beauty, but she is unaware of her value. Such a light, whether it be the glow of a woman's creative life, her wild soul, her physical beauty, her intelligence, or her generosity, always attracts the predator. Such a light that is also unaware and unprotected is always a target. Yes. So we're learning how to listen to and follow our instincts by identifying how we let the guard down in our mind, right? That's what we're doing. Yes, and the darkness is attracted to our light, you know, our aura. And we're unaware of this. It's like we're not firmly attached to that part inside of us that's at our core. And so we've given it up, but we've given it up unknowingly. And so I feel like in order to reclaim it and in order to use it properly, then we have to have that wisdom piece. We have to go through these experiences, these lessons, to be able to gain the wisdom to appreciate it, you know, that inner compass, that inner guiding light. We have to be able to be aware of it, appreciate it, and know how to use it. So all that has to work together. So, you know, my notes, I'm reading through my notes. This is the silver lining is that this experience of hardship makes us become our own hero. And I love that she talks about this as an initiatory process, because it's not, again, like you're just going back to the way you were, because the way you were was naive. Yeah, you're going to go back and pick up your intuitive nature, but now you know what it's worth. And now you're going to become more, you know, through this process. So just know that there is a purpose to all this, these hard lessons, these terrible experiences. And, you know, rock bottom can launch us into this initiation. And the initiation is everything. It's everything. It's preparing us to be able to, from this point forward, navigate with awareness and wisdom together in our mind so that we can co-create a reality that is beautiful for us and for those that we care about, that we consciously choose, you know, to have is a big part of our life. So it's all about that conscious awareness married to the wisdom. And so I hope that this has been enjoyable for you, enlightening for you. I hope that you have been able to get the wheels turning. And this is not even the complete first section. So there's more to go, but I just want to take our time with it. And I just thank you for walking the path with me, and we'll pick back up very soon. And I look forward to reading more with you all. So I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again very soon.